powered by Reviting, streaming from the Reviting Digital Studio. It's the David Daily. Exploring frontier technology, artificial intelligence, quantum innovation, and the intersection of faith, funding, and the future. Here's your host, David Goki.
Welcome to another episode of the David Daily. We're very excited to be here. And I just wanted to say thank you for tuning in. We have another episode of Funding, Faith, and Future today. And we're going to lean in on quantum ecosystems, healthcare, and scaling emerging tech, as well as helping humanity. So without further ado, I'd like to bring our guest onto stage, Dr. Kris Naudts. Nice to have you with us today, Kris.
Thank you for having me, David.
And you're all the way in the United Kingdom. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Okay, I'm based out of London. I'm a medical doctor and a psychiatrist by background. I was in academia for about 10 years, mainly here in London. And then I left academia to found my own startup, which was a travel startup called Culture Trip, which became a quite successful startup, especially for younger people and Gen Z. And then got into a spot of trouble, I think, mostly because of COVID. And also during that whole COVID period, I was misdiagnosed with a terminal neurological illness, which then eventually I turned out to not have. So I decided to focus my attention on technology that could perhaps do something for people who are indeed in a diagnostic conundrum, or indeed people who need drugs that could indeed, of course, be improved and always can be improved. And quantum technology is one of those technologies that hold that promise. So I got excited about that. I also had overlap with quantum already during my academic days. And also I had been lucky enough to have been able to invest in a startup a long time ago called Cambridge Quantum Computing, which then subsequently became Quantinuum and is one of the most successful quantum companies in the world today. So I decided together with my co-founder Zeynep to set up a VC fund to invest in quantum technologies globally. So that's me.
Wow, I feel like very lucky and blessed today to have you on the show for many reasons, primarily for our audience of angels, investors, and venture capital funds who are looking to maybe start their own fund or make more investments into future tech. And also you have a travel company as well for Gen Z, which is wonderful. I also checked out Firgun, the name of your venture fund, and your website, your platform is just very, very clean. I really love it. So let's jump into our topics today. So the format of our show, for those first tuning in, we have three main categories of topics. We have funding, we have faith, and we have future. Today, we're going to focus on the funding and future tech side because we have a specialty expert there. So without further ado, play the funding intro.
Time to talk about funding.
All right, awesome. So you've invested into quantum yourself, as well as have multiple quantum expertises. So our first topic here today is really about the global quantum technology ecosystem. So tell us a little bit more about what quantum looks like globally today and where you see it going in the next 5 years.
Sure. So quantum on the whole, I think you could say is an ecosystem of startups, or is a startup world almost, because it is still, compared to AI, a very small ecosystem. There are, globally speaking, around 500 or so startups active in quantum technology. This is a figure that comes from the Tony Blair Institute, which did a report at the end of last year trying to map out indeed where all these quantum companies and startups live. Now, if you take that universe of 500 quantum startups, then about 150 are in the US, which is what you would expect. About 65 or so, and that's perhaps something more surprising at first sight, are in the UK. So the UK doing very well on quantum technologies or in quantum technologies. And then about a third would be across Europe. And then the remainder would be across Australia, Canada, Middle East, Asia, of course, as well. So as said, the US, you're not surprised to see that, or for the US to take such a prominent role. For quantum on the whole, though, the US situation is slightly different from other parts of the world, in the sense that big tech has, of course, been heavily investing in quantum computing. Talking here about IBM, talking about Google, talking about Microsoft. In Europe, it's still, or it has been for a long time, a fairly academic ecosystem. Europe also produces a great deal of the research papers in quantum. Maybe commercial adoption is a bit slower or lower, but Europe, as said, is definitely there. And within Europe, you'd have the UK, as we already said, perhaps leading the pack with its 65 startups with a clearly articulated quantum strategy, with a budget. But also, of course, as you would expect from the size of those countries and economies, Germany and France having articulated quantum strategies and budgets and good, thriving startup ecosystems. The surprises, perhaps, within Europe and the more interesting ecosystems sit, from my perspective, maybe in the smaller countries, because there is where the variation also comes to the fore quite strikingly. So you have a fantastic ecosystem in the Netherlands, which sprung up around the Technical University of Delft and ASML, and seems to be the fruit of, indeed, visionary politicians already 10, 15 years ago, who indeed articulated the first strategy, and put adequate budgets to it. Another example of a thriving ecosystem in a small country would be Denmark, where there is indeed, of course, the legacy of Niels Bohr, one of the eminent physicists that people will have heard of. But, and that's in particular of interest, I would say, Novo Nordisk, the company that brought out Ozempic, is very heavily invested in quantum computing, and has really been, together with the Danish Sovereign Wealth Fund, been pushing to build out a quantum ecosystem around Copenhagen, which is also thriving and super interesting. Finland similarly, but that's then more around a very successful startup where an ecosystem has come to be. Switzerland is doing well. So you have pockets, and then you have pockets of silence. You have countries where there's no strategy, where there's hardly any startups. And you do wonder over time whether that leads to a sort of two-speed Europe, because this is a key technology. It is somewhat of an industrial revolution, or that's at least how we see it, but not everybody is on the same march, for sure not. Israel, amazing to see, like 2 years ago, a handful of startups now pushing for 25 or 30. So these things can be done. Japan and Korea are very active, but then it's more around the industrial conglomerates. And then I would also definitely need to call out the excellence that we're seeing in Canada and in Australia, which is fantastic too. Now, a quantum ecosystem cannot come about unless the country or the location has a deep academic ecosystem, because the people who built and who found and built these companies tend to be very advanced academics with advanced degrees in physics typically. And that is a prerequisite. I mean, I or perhaps you, if I may speculate, could not tomorrow found a quantum company. It would just not work like that. You have to have that academic background, that academic ecosystem supporting you to get it even out of the lab. And then a whole other journey starts of course, execution. So that would be a bit as a summary of the world.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. That's the first time we've had a global perspective on the show. And we've had multiple experts in the quantum ecosystem show up here on the David Daily show, where we're streaming at least once per week, maybe a couple times per week, with the focus on quantum and emerging technologies as well. So what's unique about your background, doctor, is that you actually come from the medical field yourself. You have an MD, right? You also have a doctorate as well, which is just so good. And then you also had invented some technologies yourself in the quantum space, and then furthermore are now investing into that. So could you maybe help our audience and those who are watching later understand a little bit more about how you went on that journey from doctor to venture partner?
Sure. So first of all, I didn't invent any quantum technology, to be very clear. Definitely not, or not capable of
Not
either.
yet. How about that?
So my journey, as I said, I mean, in my academic time, of course, there was a large computing element to the work I did. So there was that interest. And then building a company from scratch, even if it was in travel, led me, of course, to become extremely familiar with the world of startups and what it takes to build one, and what the challenges are, and how long it takes, and what success looks like, what the opposite looks like. I've experienced, I think, all these highs and lows that come with building a startup. So if I then add that life event that I described in the beginning of a misdiagnosis, if you put these three things together, then to me at least, it makes a fair bit of sense that a person who is fairly academic and starts off a career, and my interests are in that, in science, and then builds a company, to put that together to come out on the investment side, in particular in the subject matter as well, to me makes sense. It's like a synthesis of these previous chapters. And I feel, whereas I'm not a quantum physicist, I feel I can add value to founders from my own founder perspective and my own foundation in science. I think these two things together lead me to be, I think, qualified to play a key role in the venture capital fund, in this case, Firgun Ventures, which I co-founded with Zeynep Koroturk, who is a finance executive, used to be at Goldman Sachs. And then we have what we call scientific co-founder, advisor in Professor Atta Touré, who heads up the Cavendish lab in Cambridge. And without him, of course, this would also not work, because he is much more experienced in the technology as such. And his assessment is vital for us to even consider proceeding with the due diligence on any of the companies we might invest in.
Yeah, I did notice that you have a good set of partners in your firm, and we can really kind of lean into that in a little bit in some future topics. I'm just going to share your website here because it's one of my personal favorites. Yeah,
Okay.
new firm investing in Series A and B quantum scale-ups, Firgun, right? And of course, you have your mission statement. Why are you investing in quantum? So global impact, perfect timing, and a real opportunity. Maybe we can lean in a little bit here as to why you feel it's the perfect timing for quantum inflection, and where you feel that what metrics are you tracking to say, why it would be, a more perfect time now to invest in the quantum as a firm than maybe a different time and age when maybe quantum's more realized in the consumer world, or maybe previously, why had previous investments in quantum failed? I think it'd be interesting to kind of explore why now is the perfect time.
Sure. So the science has been around for a while, and it was indeed a question if that science could be turned into actual engineering and indeed into companies. So that's a journey that the whole space and ecosystem has been on for a while. Now, when we, as in Zeynep and I, started to think and talk properly about setting up a VC fund in quantum 2 years ago, most of what we heard, because we spoke probably to 300-400 founders and pretty much everybody that we could get a hold of in the quantum community, we tried to get input and feedback from on our thesis of indeed setting up a VC fund to invest in quantum computing. Now, the vast majority would say like, I don't know if your fund term is 10 years, that might be too short because it might take longer to get to meaningful commercial execution, etc., etc. Then 2 years later, now that narrative has really, really drastically changed, in the sense that people now give timelines of 5 to 7 years to meaningful progress in quantum computers or quantum technology. So it's more than halved. And quantum founders and big tech companies as well that are active in quantum far more confidently, or actually confidently, state roadmaps that are looking at 2030, 2035. So it's well within our 10-year fund term. Now, why is that? So there's a bunch of reasons, but the chief reason probably, I would say, is the progress in AI that we've witnessed in the past 2 years, because that progress in AI has helped a field that cuts across all quantum hardware modalities, and that field is called error correction. Now, that very heavily rests on AI. And because AI has advanced so much, error correction has advanced a lot. And because error correction has advanced a lot, all quantum hardware modalities have advanced a lot. Now, error correction, what does that word refer to? That word refers to the fact that qubits, which are the building blocks of a quantum, very fragile. People have compared it to herding kittens. Fragile, they jump around, they're sensitive to light, to noise, to vibration, you name it. So for every such number of so-called physical qubits you could create, you only had, in the end, much smaller number of so-called logical qubits, because most of these physical qubits would just fall over or come apart, become unstuck. And these ratios have steadily improved in the past 2 years. So typically you would talk about hundreds or 1,000 to 1, ratios, where you had to make 1,000, say, physical qubits to get one logical error corrected qubit. In November, I believe it was, or October, Quantinuum, which is an ion trap company, released its latest computer, where they made, I believe, around 100 physical qubits, of which about half were actually logical qubits. So that is a ratio of 2 to 1. And again, with all these hardware modalities, there are trade-offs, but you can see something meaningful happening here. A ratio that goes from 1,000 to 1 to 2 to 1. That's meaningful. That's meaningful progress. So if you put all of that together, the burst of in AI progress that feeds into error correction, that feeds into quantum, the amount of capital that kept flowing in, the amount of smart people that drive at progress in quantum, then I believe, or we believe, for us, it's very hard to see how quantum technologies would not be in a very, very meaningfully better place in 10 years. 10 years is the term that we have as a fund. And it's all about, indeed, the delta between today and in 10 years. So it might get a bit worse, or it might slow down, but in 10 years, we struggle to see how the value captured by this technology and space would not be meaningfully higher. Is that 2x? Is that 3x? Is that 10x? Is that 50x? We don't know. But this seems a space very ripe for informed venture capital. And we identified that then within that venture capital opportunity in quantum, that perhaps the biggest opportunity, the strongest bottleneck, sat at so-called Series AB. So not so much anymore lab ideas that need to get out and be spun out, because there are funds who specialize in that and focus on that, but more at the Series AB stages, beyond that, when they are out of the lab, when it's all about operational and commercial traction. That's, I think, that's what we thought is where we can add value and where the need is the highest. And that's why we set up Firgun Ventures, to focus specifically on that stage in the funding journey of the quantum startups.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I really appreciate that specific focus. And we have a third topic today that we're going to get to in terms of scaling that quantum or an emerging company. But I want to get back to this ecosystem topic, because on your website here, we see that you're focused really across three main areas: computing kind of being that first, and then of course communication and cryptography. People are saying post-quantum cryptography, and then sensing and imaging. So I'm curious, why were these three areas of focus one that you find will be beneficial for those who are investing in your fund, or those founders in Series A, Series B rounds? Why these three? And tell us a little bit more about how these contribute to the quantum technology ecosystem.
Sure. So when you have an ecosystem that comes into being, such as quantum, you have to categorize it and organize it in some shape or form. And McKinsey, I think, is the main popular outlet that came up with this categorization. This is not our categorization. So people tend to talk about three big buckets or categories in so-called quantum technologies. The biggest bucket, and where you perhaps hear, well, not perhaps, where you do hear a lot about in the media, is the quantum computing bucket. And within that bucket sit the actual hardware, as in the building of that quantum computer, but also software and middleware, etc. But it's that category that you hear a lot about when you read about fundraisers of 100 million or other astronomical amounts, because building a quantum computer is an expensive thing to do. Now, to briefly pause on that, within quantum hardware, you have 5 or so leading modalities. There's a few more, but 5 are probably leading, because you need to create these so-called quantum states and make these qubits. And there's various ways in which you can do that. You can do it via a modality called superconducting. You can do it with light, as in photonics. You can do it by trapping an ion. And there's another bunch of ways in which, indeed, it can be done. So that's one big category: expensive, competition between all these modalities. For a long time, a strong expectation within and outside the community that one modality would win the day and the rest would fall behind. So far, somewhat surprisingly, we haven't seen that. Error correction has helped all of them forward, and you hear much less of that thesis today, although you still hear it, and it's still a possibility that one gets really meaningfully ahead and others get behind. But there's more confidence in the fact that each of these categories might have their own merit and might be useful or more useful than another for certain use cases. It's not clear yet just exactly how, but that's currently a bit what you would hear about that within the community, that it might all progress, probably will all progress, and some will excel better than others in certain use cases.
Right.
So that's quantum computing. Quantum sensing is a very different beast. That's where you turn the fragility of these qubits, namely the fact that they respond so strongly and so fragilely to sound and noise and vibration, you turn it onto its head into a virtue, namely you use it as a sensor that picks up any and all signals. So here we're in the domain of, on the one hand, medical applications, where you could use this for diagnostics, for imaging, but you're also in the domain of dual use and defense technology, where indeed sensors can be used to detect submarines and so on and so forth. And then the third category, called quantum cryptography and communications, is another category you actually hear a lot about in the media, because this all speaks to this so-called pending doomsday that they call Q-Day, where encryption would be broken. Encryption of the internet, encryption of any and all data we so dearly held or hold secure. And the quantum computer could break that. So a lot of attention goes to that in the media and in the investment land as well, on what needs to happen to secure our data and keep our data secure.
Yeah, that's good. I love hearing that. And I actually pulled up the McKinsey report. We're sharing that on screen for folks. Actually, it was from 2021 of all times and places, which is so interesting to me. That, yeah, to your point exactly, that the labs have already completed a lot of the early stage research that's needed for quantum. And now it's really about, can we find the right funding and get the right dollars and the right people together to invest into that ecosystem. So I absolutely love this conversation. If you're tuning in for the first time, we're here with the guest on funding, faith, and future tech, talking about quantum technology. It's just so exciting to have so many people tuning into this topic. I'm here with Dr. Kris Naudts, and we're going to go into our second topic, which is all about healthcare applications, quantum and healthcare. So as a doctor and as someone who is misdiagnosed with a terminal illness, by the way, we're so thankful that that was a false prognosis and diagnosis for you, that you're now here alive to even be on this show with us. And we're curious, what does quantum and healthcare have to do with each other?
Well, I would say two broad areas here to talk about. So quantum computers are supposed to deliver computation that is exponentially faster and more powerful than classical computing. That's the central belief of why we are building quantum computers on a scale perhaps not quite imaginable. And if that can be done, and we believe it can be done, and it's a journey of execution, and it will affect every industry and every vertical, healthcare just being one of them. As said, every vertical will be affected. We ourselves have started a 6-episode podcast called Time to Talk Quantum, where we very specifically look at what we call intersections. So one is on quantum and health, which is about to come out, I think, in the next couple of weeks. One is on quantum and AI, one is on quantum and finance, one is on quantum and defense, one is even on quantum and art. So quantum will intersect with everything. We just singled out those very verticals because we feel there is good traction and a wider demand in people to hear more about each of those very specific interactions and intersections. Because you will notice everybody asks you, oh, how does a quantum computer work, and what is quantum, and what is this, and what is that? And mostly people's eyes glaze over as soon as you're halfway through your explanation, because it is so technical and it is so sciencey. Whereas I feel if you talk about the relevance of quantum by touching upon these intersections, people realize that there is a much more engaging conversation to be had about quantum at all levels that they enjoy and are enthusiastic to hear more about, that perhaps they feel less if they watch the umpteenth video where somebody tries to simplify it, but still in a very, very scientific manner that just eludes a lot of people because of not having that educational background or aptitude or in that direction, or call it what you like. So we are all about these intersections. So now to answer your question, quantum and health is one such intersection. And there are two categories. One is the diagnostic category, where indeed a more powerful computer can probably help, or a much more powerful computer can probably help with diagnosing things earlier and more precisely. So that's something that one would expect. Sensing can directly help with that by indeed picking up signal, and therefore indeed hopefully more accurate or faster diagnosis. And there are already projects running in that direction with quantum MRI scans. The European Union is investing quite heavily in that. And then there is the whole area, of course, of drug discovery and assimilation of molecules. This is going to be very interesting because also AI has been holding out that promise, and so far AI has not quite been able to deliver perhaps on that immense promise it holds. Not to say it won't, but it hasn't been an easy delivery so far. Everybody in the scientific community got extremely excited, myself included, about the work of DeepMind and AlphaFold, isomorphic labs now. But we still haven't quite gotten that synthetic drug that AI pertains to deliver. Quantum hopefully can help accelerating that journey. So those would be the two broad areas, diagnostics and drug discovery. And there are a number of startups that work in drug discovery. Big Pharma works, of course, actively in drug discovery. Probably the leading companies are Eli Lilly, I think, in the US, perhaps, Boehringer Ingelheim in Germany, very active, and indeed Novo Nordisk. Very interestingly as well, super interesting, I find, again, as a doctor, is that some hospitals have made the jump or the leap and are immersing themselves in quantum. Chief amongst them, probably the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio, where they collaborate for a while now with IBM, and they even have a quantum computer on site, which they have placed in the middle of their canteen, which must have been, from what they told me, at least partly to do with space issues, but also to visualize it and to get a workforce intrigued and pulled in by the promise of a quantum computer. The Mayo Clinic is doing similar work, I think, with Sandbox, which is Google's AI quantum company, and so on and so forth. And then there's startups. There were some reports of an early detection for tuberculosis program. There have been companies working around or with diamond sensors, which could, in the long term, can you imagine, replace ECG, electrocardiogram, so that you can just have a sensor and you don't need to tape yourself with all these wires and all the rest of it that it today requires. It's being used for testing, antigen testing. So what you used to do for COVID, again, there might be improvements there possible through quantum, HIV testing, you name it. So a lot of interesting stuff going on. And maybe another aspect to take away in this context of health and quantum as a sort of summary message or a contextualization message, perhaps is the better way of putting it. As said, in the media, you will read about Q-Day, a quantum computer is going to be built, and lo and behold, it's going to crack all our secure data. That's one part of the coverage. The other part of the coverage is the cynical, skeptical one, like, yeah, but when will that quantum computer come? They've been saying it will come for 10 years or for 15 years. When is it going to be there, and what does it even mean? And then there is a strand of startups who talk about building a 1 million qubit quantum computer, etc., etc. And it's quite forgivable that you get lost in all that noise as to where are we, what does it mean, what are any serious use cases that are around the corner, because you get lost in all these qubit counts. As I already said earlier on, there's physical qubits and there's logical qubits. It's a very big difference which one you're talking about. You're talking about 1 million logical qubits. Well, that's way out. That's far out. That's not for the next few years at all. If you're talking about 1 million physical qubits, then that's probably doable. Now, for drug discovery and its sibling material science, the good news is that you don't need 1 million logical qubits to do meaningful work. As soon as you're sort of around 1,000 logical qubits, a bit lower, a bit higher, you can start simulating proper stuff and you can do proper work in drug discovery. So this is not that far out. If you know we're now at 100, 1,000, you can see that that's reachable, that's doable, that is a future that you can almost like grasp. And that's where drug discovery will show its first fruits, you would hope.
I like that perspective, especially when you can replace maybe some of those very expensive diagnostic tests inside of the hospital. And the hospital experience is quite different across countries, as you know. In the United States, kind of the first thing is can the hospital systems and healthcare systems diagnose and find kind of a highly profitable treatment plan, right? Because the hospitals here are focused on treatment plans and profit over necessarily the positive health outcome that one might want if money and profit was removed from the equation. And then secondly, to your point about real discovery, the executives, the big tech executives would suggest that maybe AGI would get here in 1 to 2 years, potentially, where the computer or the technology is actually inventing new knowledge or making new discoveries and maybe even replacing some of these PhD researchers. Now, I personally lean a little bit more on the conservative sides, thinking that it would take a little bit longer than just a couple of years to accomplish that. But in terms of drug discovery and medicine, since we're focusing on that topic, how do we test clinically, like clinical trials, like scale distribution? In the past 5 years, obviously we saw vaccinations, leapfrog into a very fast speed to market, right? From the invention of some of these vaccines with the mRNA topics. And our previous guest actually was speaking about some of the risks as well of quantum and AI creating drugs that could potentially have other, nefarious types of like activity in them, especially when we think about things like CRISPR and technology embedded inside of the biology, the human body. So I'm curious, just going down that Eli Lilly pathway of drug discovery, what does it look like for clinical trials, go to market, cost of the drug, right? Are these drugs going to be more expensive, you think? Will they be more economical? And I'm curious, does your firm invest in some of these discovery platforms or considerations in terms of business? Really wanting to lean a little bit more into how we go from, okay, today we have a new idea, to tomorrow this potential drug is in market.
Yeah, so many aspects in that question that I can in theory jump on. So I think today it takes about 20 years on average to make a drug, and it costs a few billion. With a quantum computer or functioning quantum computer, we would hope that timeline collapses, and therefore the costs should per definition collapse. Now, as you rightly point out, collapsing timelines is in theory good news, but it might and must not, I would say, lead to indeed releasing drugs prematurely and not have adequate safeguards in place. So I would hope that these things are being put in place for the advent of this technology and the progress of this technology. And this does not only pertain to the healthcare applications of a quantum computer or indeed AI. This applies across the board and in all the intersections that it touches. Maybe it speaks more to people when it's about health, but this is an issue or a challenge across the board, and is something that need to be seriously thought about, because we can't afford to get it quite wrong, in all fairness. Now, the progress of quantum is, of course, a story and a journey of progress of technology, but it is also very much a journey of execution, of delivery to the end user, of commercialization, and there's many unanswered questions there on drug discovery not more or not less than on any of the other domains where that is a challenge in the quantum space, I would say.
Yeah, especially when you talk about that 20-year timeline and that 2 billion in investment. It's kind of interesting to see and hear as as quantum as a technology becomes more integrated, and as technology itself becomes more integrated with the body. I think it'll be very interesting to see how some of those things push past maybe the socio and economical expectations of what the technology is capable of doing. Sometimes the common person won't adopt the technology simply because of its positioning in the market, even if it's quite affordable or effective, right, in terms of the
Yes.
outcome that you want. And
Yes.
sometimes if it's too cheap, it might be like, oh, well, this can't be as effective or as good. So when it comes to healthcare and medicine, where in terms of, let's just talk about human body. Are we talking about more maybe heart related medicines? Are we talking about more bone related, maybe more brain related, blood related, lungs, other organs? Where are you seeing a lot of those investments being made in the healthcare space as it relates to quantum and healthcare investments?
It's a very, very good question. And there's indeed a couple of things, again, that one can say about that. And I'll come back to your question. But one critical question in this whole quantum journey when it comes to health or AI for that matter is indeed, what will this do to the existing pharma industry, and who's going to extract the value of this technological progress?
Right.
Let's put it in a different way. Is NVIDIA the biggest healthcare company today? Is that a sensible way of putting it? And if they are not, might they become? And what then happens to pharma? What happens to pharma clinical trials, governance, all regulation, all the things you mentioned in your previous points, if it is indeed big tech that suddenly creates the drugs? That's a very, very, very different world that we are indeed facing. Now, to your question on which organ or which discipline within medicine, that's, as a doctor, it's interesting because some disciplines are perhaps more, what shall I say, akin to adopting technology than others, because the discipline itself is already quite technical. Psychiatry is not that technical, for example. Radiology is per definition technical. Nuclear medicine is per definition technical. Cardiology, in a very different way, is technical too, but is extremely competitive. So that competition perhaps drives the adoption forward of a new technology as a differentiator. Surgeons, similarly, why do they use robots and AI? Again, to differentiate, perhaps also, as you indicated earlier, there might be some commercial considerations there as well, of course, to have the cutting edge technology in your hospital. But to summarize that, there is definitely ample, shall I say, promise in understanding the brain better, and therefore any neurological or neurodegenerative disorders better. I mean, we have behind us, if I may say, I graduated as a doctor towards the end of the 90s. And that was a decade of the brain. And since then, I don't know what number it is, but it's an enormous number that has been put into Alzheimer's research. And we're still not there. I mean, we have some progress, but not remotely as radical as we hoped it to be. And it puts a bit of a reality check, I feel, and I say this as a doctor, around indeed, and in particular technologists who are obviously not doctors and who haven't lived healthcare neither as a professional nor as a patient necessarily, that the technology is really only one part of this journey, and there is 10, 20 years of probably regulation and clinical trials to be had on the back of bringing out anything that is revolutionary, that is not necessarily accounted for. And that does play a role also when you ask me, do you invest in that? Yes, we would. We're definitely very interested in looking at opportunities in that intersection space between health and quantum. But the execution part is as if not more important there, I feel, than the actual technological ingenuity, which in quantum, I'm yet to meet a team of founders where the technological ingenuity is not there. I mean, it is almost per definition there. It's more about, are they people that can scale this into an actual and build this into an actual company that differentiates, that wins the competition? Those are, from where I'm sitting, really, really, really important questions when you're evaluating a quantum startup.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And that's going to be true for any and all startups, especially for angels, for investors, and for venture partners, venture capitalists who are looking for a good business to invest into or a good fund to partner with. It's important to make sure that you have a good execution plan and a roadmap so that you can take that innovative technology to market.
Yeah.
And I think that's where automation, where even LinkedIn Live, for example, is a good way to reach lots of people at scale. But also, do you have a good revenue pipeline and a good customer experience, right? So that your customers are happy, they keep paying you, your net recurring revenue goes up, and you also have happy customers that stay with you forever and increase their LTV and never churn. I mean, could we live in a more ideal world as a venture capitalist? Maybe we can. So I'd like to get to that third topic, which is so interesting, and we'll play the future video now as we get into this third topic.
Let's talk about quantum and the future of technology.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We've got some new folks here, over 100 people tuning in live across all major platforms. I'm here with Dr. Kris here talking about all things quantum. And I really appreciate that your firm, your venture firm, Firgun Ventures, along with your team of experts, are scaling Series A and B businesses in quantum technology specifically. You have a global understanding. You're based in the United Kingdom, in London, and have even referenced Eli Lilly and the Cleveland Clinic in the United States as some emerging healthcare facilities that are doing research. So as we talk about the quantum scale and how to scale a business with smart people, what are some of the ingredients that a business or an organization would need to meet some of those milestones and requirements that a venture capital fund like yourself would require in that Series A, Series B stage?
So quantum is different from other spaces in the sense that it's a space founded and built by physicists and not computer scientists. So that's very different. I mean, from your, like, I'm yet to see the Elon Musk of quantum. The typology is quite different, and a lot of quantum founders are what you could call accidental founders. They did not necessarily dream of building a company when they were a teenager. They founded their companies not infrequently just because they needed more money to keep growing their idea that they had in the lab. And some of them might never have left the lab if there was enough money in the lab to continue building it. So that's, I think, a bit different from other areas of tech. Consequently, there's very few stupid ideas in quantum. There's definitely stupid ideas in AI, and there's definitely stupid propositions. And if you scale that, you will scale a stupid proposition. In quantum, that's less the case. All the ideas hold definitely some scientific and technical merit, and the people who have come up with them, as I said, have very advanced degrees, and they've definitely thought that all through. Now, all of that is not to say that that good starting point of intelligent people who mean well and build their companies for impact, who have a good idea, who have an initial good team of academics and people that they know in their network to get their idea and company out of the lab, none of that is sufficient to become indeed an NVIDIA or an Apple. There's a lot more that is needed, and scaling is hard. Scaling is as hard as it gets because it's competitive and it needs to be fast. Otherwise, there's also not really a point. Yet it needs to be sustainable. And you can make quite so many mistakes because you don't know before your scaling journey, unless you've been on one. And if you haven't been on one, you don't know what you don't know. And the surprises keep sort of, raining on your head, so to speak. And I'm saying that having founded a very different type of company, namely a travel startup, but we certainly scaled it. And we scaled it in many ways, shall I say, in a not sustainable and suboptimal way, because it was all about speed. And we went, for example, from 15 to 500 people in a year. Now, that's in and of itself not a good idea, but there's certainly ways in which you could just about conceive doing that. And one key thing there is to have a plan, which maybe we didn't have, or we didn't think that through enough. You have to have a certain order of hiring. So it's not because you want to scale your quantum company and marketing people are available more readily than your engineers that you should hire marketing people. It will just lead to a very topsy-turvy organization where then you have potentially an excellent marketing team, but not a product to bring to market. And it makes little sense, of course, and you will have a lot of frictions and internal pressures that are then much, much, much harder to solve. So where the difference, I think, is made in successful scaling is in your hiring and in your hiring roadmap. And in quantum, this is unbelievably pertinent for two reasons. One, it's an emerging space, so you will not necessarily easily find a CMO or a COO who has scaled a quantum company before, because not many quantum companies have been scaled so far. It's still a small space. So that's your first challenge. Your second challenge is that there is not an infinite amount of quantum PhDs out there. So there's also talent scarcity. So you need to really, really, really be very, I think, clear-headed about how you're going to tackle that very aspect, your people roadmap, and how you're going to grow it, in what order, and where you're going to find the talent, and what you're going to do if you don't find it, or they all go to your competitor, or I don't know. And second, you would need to look, especially if you're in the hardware business, is my supply line secure? And what is my contingency plan if indeed there is a conflict like now in the Middle East? Does it affect my building of my quantum computer? And what can I do to mitigate potentially such risks? So those are just a few top-level comments on scaling and its challenges, with then maybe a bit of emphasis on the peculiarities of the quantum space.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. The first is team management team, right? And not just scaling with people, but having a team where, yeah, you scale with the people, but you scale with the right people. Going from 15 to 500 in 12 months. Yeah, that's 485. I mean, that's 50 to 75 people potentially a month. So there's more than one person a day, right? So and that's just a calendar day. So yeah, I can imagine how quickly that type of a organization could scale. Now in quantum, to your point, what I really like is that quantum is not, the industry is not full of computer scientists. It's full of PhD physicists, right? Who are very brilliant and very smart, but to your point, have not scaled a quantum organization, let alone a business. So maybe if we could think a little bit more into the future, what would be required in terms of team structure and the order in which you bring your team on so that you can scale your company from Series A to Series B in the quantum space over the next 5 to 7 years?
I think it's hard to give a very specific answer to that, except you're watching the order of hiring, you're watching the pipelines, you're identifying where people are going to come from, and you're very methodical about it. And you don't go any faster than you should, but you don't go any slower either. It's trying to get it as right as you can vis-a-vis your competitors. I think the most valuable quantum companies today, they are not valued on revenue, because that is not always very high, even in the public companies. But what you could value them on to an extent is the amount of talent they have managed to indeed recruit and amass. I think a Quantinium, for example, I don't know again the figure off the top of my head, but I think they have 200 or 300 or so, if not more, quantum PhDs in-house. That's a decent moat around your company and your proposition, I would say.
Yeah, I love that idea of your people being part of the moat, especially when you think about an investment. So if you've been able to acquire the talent, and you see this happen in big tech as well, even some more notable ones, right, where you have a host of people, or even maybe an entire organization would leave the organization and move to another company, competitor, etc. Yeah, when you have 300 physicists who have domain expertise and domain knowledge in industry, and on top of that, they are also highly educated and highly motivated, continuing to invent and create new discoveries, that is an incredible moat around your organization. So tell us a little bit more about how you advise finding the right team and finding more experts in your startup as you scale. And what would you be looking for in that team plan, in that people plan for an organization that's scaling, let's say from 150 people to 750 people. So a 5x growth plan, let's just say over maybe like 2 to 3 years. What's some of those things that you've seen have been successful and have produced the highest and best results, the measurable results for an organization that's growing?
Yeah, I think you need buy-in, I feel, at all levels. You need buy-in and an alignment between your board, your management team, your founding team. These two are not necessarily the same, and indeed then your broader people, your staff. Everybody needs to buy into what it is you're trying to do. And if what you're trying to do is blitzscale, okay, fine. But then everybody needs to buy into it, and you need to be very transparent about that being the goal and that being the way forward, and motivate as to why that is that road is taken, and articulate what some of the challenges are that are therefore inherently going to come your way. As an investor, we don't expect our founders at Series A, B to have all the answers. I mean, certainly not, because as said, they haven't done it before, so the answers aren't there, and nobody has, or very few people have done the successful scaling of quantum companies, because there aren't so many, as said, that have scaled into meaningfully sizable organizations. So I think it's about having a roadmap, being able to iterate, knowing your own weaknesses, thinking through as a founder, and I mean that in the kindest possible way, having been a founder, what it is that you actually want, and to keep a bit of buffer perhaps also between yourself and your company. I mean, don't buy or don't drink the Kool-Aid that you are your company. You're not. You are not. There is a life after it, regardless of how passionate you are. And your company is not going to become more successful by removing the space between you as a person and what it is that you do, no matter how meaningful it is. And I think a lot of founders, sole founders in particular, fall into that trap because it gets so overwhelmingly busy, and you're doing something indeed potentially so meaningful that you lose all or a lot of or a great part of the perspective you so desperately need to go for a full 10 years. And I say 10 years because to build an actual successful company that lasts, you need about that. Now, 10 years time, I don't know if you do that, David, but in 10 years time, you are a different person. There will be all sorts of life events, positive and negative. There's not the same person that's in front of me. It's impossible. So we are definitely founder-centric. I mean, for sure. But that founder and I both understand that him and I are different people in 10 years. I find that important, that is what shall I say, articulated, explicitized. And there's no right and wrong answers, but that's the journey you're on. They say taking outside investment, venture capital, it's going into a marriage where you cannot divorce, which is probably not untrue. You're going to be in it together.
Right. Yeah, and that's so interesting. We had a good conversation with the founder the other day about the similarities between legal marriage in the United States and globally, for example, and that of a relationship with the founder. And oftentimes, your venture capital relationship will be longer than the average marriage, which is just such an interesting statistic.
Yes.
Before we go into our rapid fire round, Dr. Kris, I did want to ask you one more related question relationally, which is, as you're thinking about exploring a 7 to 10 year relationship with a founder or a founding team, what is that, high level quality that you really care about? I don't want to say silver bullet, but what are a couple of the things you're like, these are, a must have at the top of my checklist?
Yeah, I think in quantum, it's not about intelligence. It's there. And it's also not often about benevolence, because most are. I mean, so
Mhm.
those intelligence I definitely take relatively for granted in the quantum space. Benevolence is definitely the base case by far.
Mhm.
But I would say that it would be ability to introspect and self-assess. I would find that
Mhm.
that's very important, and you can get that quite quickly conversationally if a person is prone to do that and able to do that in an adequate way. Some openness of mind and flexibility, and ideally a high degree of morality, right? I mean, it's a company, yes, of course you have to turn a profit, but it's also a real world, and how you live and the values you live by should not be all that different when applied in a company context, I feel. And I'd go there conversationally with them if I get the chance, for sure.
I love it. It's so good. I like that idea of being a good person.
Mm.
My sister one time said, "Just be a effing good person."
Yeah.
And we could sit here all day long and say, what does good mean? What does morals mean? What does ethics? What are values? And we've had some of those in-depth conversations on this show, particularly in the faith aspect, because it's more than just the world's religions. It's the faith, it's the spirituality, it's the mental clarity as well. So
Mm.
Dr. Kris, it's such a pleasure having you on the show here. I want to go through a very quick rapid fire set of questions. So just think about the first thing that comes to your mind. There's no wrong answer here. I just want to make sure that you're ready before we get started. Are you ready?
Go for it, David.
Okay. Psychiatry or entrepreneurship, what is the tougher clinic?
Entrepreneurship.
All right. Routine, what's the very first thing you do in the morning to keep your mind sharp?
I rush to the bathroom.
Nice. AI optimist or realist? Where do you sit on the spectrum?
Optimist.
Okay, love that. Why? This question is about your why. What's the most common mistake that founders make when it comes to their own mental health?
Invulnerability. They think they are invulnerable.
Right, Superman syndrome. Got it.
No.
Legacy. If you could be remembered for one thing, your medical work or your tech impact, which would it be?
I don't. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to choose between those two.
Okay. If there was one word on your grave, what would the word be?
If there's one word on,
On your grave?
bewildered.
Bewildered. I love that. All right. And finally, what is a failed idea that you had that actually taught you the most?
Uh, to consider moving to Dubai.
Love it. Awesome. Okay, well, we're going to go to our final segment, which is our anchor segment here with Dr. Kris right after this quick segment video. Beyond the bag, beyond the bag, beyond the bag. All right, beyond the bag, you're a traveler yourself. You launched a travel company. Kris, doctor, what is in your bag? You always take it with you. We're dying to see it.
Yes, well, my computer, which is not in my bag because I'm talking to it. My toothbrush would be there, and there will always be, invariably, there will be a book or two, and mostly there will be a fiction book and there will be a non-fiction book. So currently, I'm reading The Museum of Innocence, which is a book by a writer called Orhan Pamuk, who's a Turkish writer. It's about obsessive love. So a bit different from quantum. And my non-fiction book that I'm carrying around now is Polar War by Kenneth Rose, which is all indeed about security and defense and the Arctic Circle and what is going on there, which I thought was topical to read. But these books change, of course, every other week, and I'll always have one on me. It's not possible that I will leave without.
Very nice. Wonderful. For us today, we actually have a Sybil battery charger. Sybil is our note taker partnership. They help us with all of our notes and AI notes. And also, if you haven't checked out Sybil, check out Sybil. You could check out Meet Sybil. It's their AI agent that can help you take action notes and understand the emotional feelings, looks, as well as any body language during your calls and your meetings. Then they integrate with all of your wonderful things. So they sent us a battery charger. So this is very important to 10,000 MWH charger. Yeah, MAH. I want to make sure I get the right power settings on that. All right. So as we conclude, Dr. Kris, it was such a pleasure to have you on this show. What is the best way for people to stay connected with you and follow you?
Probably LinkedIn.
All right, wonderful. All right, look for Dr. Kris Henry Naudts on LinkedIn. And then just for people who are watching this, who are the types of people that you're really looking forward to connecting with and meeting? And what are you hoping to accomplish with the people that you meet on LinkedIn?
I'm looking for people with shared professional interests, I would say. And that could be indeed quantum, or that could be the wider tech and policy ecosystem. And yeah, I mean, I rarely do not reply to a polite message.
Wonderful. I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining the show, folks. It has been a pleasure having you on the David Daily today. And we have another guest coming up on this Thursday. Jake Cutler is going to be with us. And I can't wait to have more guests on this show. And if you like this, please comment, like, subscribe, do all the things. And we'll see you on all major platforms, including Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, and Kick. Thank you so much. We'll see you on the flip side. Bye-bye. Did you know that you can go live with the power of pressing just one button? It really is that simple, especially when you have a production team like Reviting, production partner that can help you go live, not just on LinkedIn, but on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter/X, and of course, other platforms like Twitch, Kick, and TikTok. So I just want to encourage you to go live yourself as well if you've ever wanted to get in front of the camera, especially on live stream as you get to engage with the live audience.
I want to give a quick testimonial for the Reviting team. I was really nervous about doing lives. And so thanks to Jessie and her team, I've now been doing them for, I think, 7 or 8 months now. The other thing is they very much have helped me increase my reach and online presence. So thank you, Reviting.
Jessie, I love what you and the team do. You make it so easy for me to get in, having a meaningful conversation with some amazing guests, and then watch the post-production. But I've been picking up 50 followers a day just because that content is resonating so well. So it's working across a lot of different channels for me, and I can't thank you enough.
I'm Sarah Hanks. I'm with the Northwest Industrial Resource Center. I'm the president and CEO. One of the problems that we struggle with is getting our brand out there. And the idea of going live on LinkedIn and using that platform to its fullest extent through the way they're able to take the live event and break it down into bite-sized posts, which that can then be used to further take advantage of the platform and its capabilities. Your team shows up very organized. They're holding us accountable to the tasks that we need to complete.